Hi, I'm Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the Senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville, and for 4 years, the chair of the Next Generation 911 Commission. Today, my very special guest is Laurie Flaherty, who was an early and brilliant teacher for me as I was starting and working through 911 issues. It's going to be a really fun conversation. So let me just say, Laurie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, I'm happy to be here, my friend. Thanks for asking me.
Absolutely. So let's start with your background, because you started out in nursing and
Yes, I did.
with a BS from Marquette and then a master's in emergency nursing and stuff. Tell us about your childhood and how that became your first career.
Well, there was no plan, first of
Okay.
all. I'm not one of those people who always knew what they wanted to be. And so, through a series of adventures, shall we say,
Yes.
I started working as back then a nurse's aide. And I thought I could do this. And I applied to nursing school and I got in. And that was my career for 25 years,
Yep.
most of it in emergency nursing. I was a flight nurse for a couple of years, and then I decided it was time to go sit down.
Right.
And
So,
I
so
took a
let's
job with the
before you
federal government. Yeah, go
Okay,
ahead.
but before we go there, let's stay with nursing
Yeah.
for a minute because there's such a crisis, such a shortage. Tell me what you loved about nursing and what was the hardest thing.
I think what I loved about it was just knowing how much that I was helping the people that I was taking care of. Especially in the emergency department, you're there, during a crisis. Some are very happy, delivery of babies, that kind of thing. Some are very sad, but it was always a great privilege to be able to do that for people. So I really like that a lot. I think healthcare certainly has become a lot more complicated. And so being able to help the people that I was taking care of um, grew more difficult
Mhm.
after time. And that was always really frustrating because you knew what they needed. And, just trying to get them from point A to point B sometimes was very difficult.
Yes. And how when you were a nurse, how were you respected by doctors and by colleagues as a woman, as a nurse? Did you get the respect? Were you able to be influential in the way you wanted to be?
Well, that varied. Certainly with depending on the personality of the person. Um, but I worked mostly in county hospitals,
Hmm?
county emergency departments. For in a number of places, I was the charge nurse, which is the person who basically keeps things moving.
Yes.
Really, I think people think the doctor is the person who runs the emergency department, but truly, they see people, they diagnose what's going on, but the nurses are the ones that really keep things moving. And you know, I only ever had one rule. My job was to solve the problem of the person laying in the bed. And many times people tried to make other problems my job, and they just weren't. And so it was fairly easy to become assertive because I wasn't doing anything for me.
Sure.
I was trying to help the person I was taking care of.
As it should be.
So yeah.
So then you came to NHTSA, which is a federal agency most folks could not translate uh, for $1 million, but it's the National Highway Traffic Safety
Safety
Administration.
administration. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I
Yeah.
know
It's
that.
a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. It doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. So why don't you start with what NHTSA does, and then you
Sure.
started being the 911, the key 911 person there, starting in 2004. So why don't you tell us about NHTSA and then how you morphed into that role?
Sure. NHTSA has existed since 1966. It was created, I believe, by the Johnson administration um, because deaths on the roadway became an epidemic.
Yeah.
And so that the agency was started basically to improve roadway safety. And a large portion of that, if you're really into saving lives, is not just about prevention. It's about making sure that they get to where they need to go after the crash has occurred, to make sure that, that chain of life is sustained. And so the Office of EMS has been at the federal level within
Emergency
NHTSA.
Management Services.
Yes, thank you. Has been, at NHTSA since then. It was actually created as a result of grants that were provided to the states by the Department of Transportation specifically. And I think they knew at the time that they couldn't just exist to transport or take care of crash victims. So it automatically became a sort of an all-comers kind of system.
So before we pivot, actually,
Yeah.
911, and I really was planning to talk only about 911 with you, but NHTSA is probably one of the most important federal agencies that folks have never heard of. Because if you think about everything from seatbelt usage to
Yep.
drunk driving and drugged driving,
Yep. Yep.
lighting, signage, like all sorts
Right.
of child safety seats, think of
Uh-huh.
all the pieces of how our roads are safer than they used to be.
Absolutely.
Or not, because now we're distracted driving and
Well, there's always something, and it used to be alcohol. It's shifting toward, marijuana as that
yep.
becomes legal. So things evolve, but the agency has always, done its best to try and keep up with all of that.
Yep. Now, so I've been working on DUID, driving under the influence of drugs, and
Yep.
Maryland, the Senate just voted the other day. We're waiting for the conference committee, the House Senate negotiation. But I had an amendment on the floor because of drugged driving, impaired
Yep.
driving. And every state, after they legalize cannabis, impaired driving, crashes, and fatalities go up. And
Yep.
I don't want that to happen in Maryland. So yes. Okay. So let's go back. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Let's go back to 911. So you were doing emergency management, EMS, emergency medical services, and then how did that become 911?
Well, so I was working in the Office of Emergency Medical Services when the law was passed that created the 911 program, and Congress gave us the authority to manage the program, but they did not give us a lot of resources at that point, to hire a bunch of 911 people. We had to make someone into a 911 person, and that person was me.
Yes.
And my boss came to me one day and said, "How would you like to do something completely different?" And I said, "Okay, sure."
Wow.
I mean, we had three lines in the statute. That's really all there was. But it was great. I mean, it was a very different landscape back then in the federal government. I mean, DHS. So this was at the end of
Department of
2004.
Homeland Security.
Yes, thank you. Uh, the Department of Homeland Security had just been formed in 2002. This was at the end of 2004, so they were still trying to organize. Their Office of Emergency Communications really wasn't established until after Hurricane Katrina in 2005. The Federal Communications Commission has a jurisdiction over the delivery of 911 calls. They have jurisdiction over the AT&Ts and Verizons of the world in terms of how the call is delivered. But there was no one in the federal space that did 911.
So it's a little surprising, though, that NHTSA ended up being chosen, because yes, there are crashes that demand a 911 response, but grandma's having a heart attack, or my house is on fire, or a woman who was just raped or something. That's unrelated to transportation safety.
Well, yeah. So interesting. It's one of those DC stories. So at that point, our secretary was a guy by the name of Norman Mineta.
Yep, former congressman from California. Great.
Yeah, that's right. And he, he came from Silicon Valley, very into technology, very into safety. And he started asking questions. All right, who's got the front of the call covered? Well, that's the Federal Communications Commission. Okay, who covers the response? Well, that's, fire, law enforcement, and emergency medical services. And there's a bunch of agencies that deal with that. And he said, okay, who in the federal government talks about processing the call? And there was crickets. And there, at the same time, there was a senator from Montana named Conrad Burns, who was the chair of the Commerce Committee, and he was asking a lot of the same questions. And so So that's why, particularly the grant program became a joint program. I'm
And
not sure.
bipartisan. Senator Burns was a Republican and Congressman
That's right.
Cheryl was a Democrat,
That's
and
right.
so that's helpful.
And while neither place made sense, like, it was a very different federal landscape at that point. But as you probably know from being in government for so long, sometimes stuff that doesn't make sense just it works.
Yeah.
It works, and it's been there since 2004. So
So how did you start learning? Here's a monstrously important thing. Be an expert. How did you start? Where did
well,
you go?
you may have experienced this too, but the 911 community is one of the most generous groups of people in terms of their knowledge and their expertise that I've ever come across. And from the day I started until the day I retired, I relied on them really heavily,
Yeah.
to understand the technical piece, how all the wires and widgets work. I
Yeah.
also, relied on them a lot to understand the operational piece, and also the governance piece. Yeah, so because they're all really important in terms of understanding 911. And I made sure they were always involved.
Yes.
Um, so I relied on the community. I really did.
That's fantastic. Yes, same for me. So I served in the House, and then I was ultimately out for 12 years. I chose not to seek reelection. And during the intervening time before I ran for and was elected to the Senate, a wonderful person in my district was struck by lightning during a
Yes.
thunderstorm, and Carl Henn was killed and died when 911 was overwhelmed. And I said, if I'm ever back in office, I'm going to work in Carl's memory. And who knew the slippery slope that would mean? But I called people and I started having meetings, and they started with the acronyms, and I had
I
no idea what they
remember.
were talking about. And yeah, amazing. There are really extraordinary people who work in this field. So Next Gen 911, Next
Mhm.
Generation 911. We've been working on this in Maryland. You've been working at the national level for forever. Uh, what should people know, and why should people care about Next Gen? How's it going to be better at helping them?
Well, the old, shall we say, the old legacy 911 system can't, there are two things that it can't do. It can't accept any form of digital information, which means photographs, video,
Text.
any kind of data from, a car crash, automatic crash notification data.
Mhm.
It can't do that.
Mhm.
The other thing that the old legacy 911 system can't do is interconnect with other 911 centers.
Mhm.
So if there is an outage for whatever, or they're overloaded or whatever, there's a catastrophe and they're out of commission. Katrina is probably the biggest example of,
Mhm.
I forget how many 911 centers were taken out of commission, and those calls went nowhere.
Mhm.
So when you introduce, a digital platform, then photographs and video and all that become possible. And if you model it after the internet, then everyone becomes connected. And so it becomes possible for 911 centers to back each other up in the event of an overload, or, whatever the case might be. So those are and to the 911 community, the networking piece is probably much more important than the digital piece.
Yes. So on Maryland's Eastern Shore, as you may know, there are 9 counties, and they can, if Dorchester County is
Yep.
overloaded, Caroline County can pick up, or Kent County, and that they're all interconnected, which is
Mm-hmm.
really helpful, and it lowers the cost because no one has to hire enough people to answer at the peak time. So
Right, right.
and just for anyone watching who doesn't know, on August 20th of 2020, everywhere in Maryland, we went live with text to 911. So if you can, you should always call 911. But if you can't, because of a disability or you're in hiding or something, know that you can text, and in any language too. So that's important. Um, so reclassification. So
Mhm.
I talk about about our 911 specialists, which is what we renamed them in law in Maryland. And I say the courageous women and men under the headsets who save lives and property every day. And I wear my headset pin all the time. Talk about that job, why it's so hard, and some of the challenges that you've heard about or
I don't, I think people realize, unless they've watched, some television show that accurately portrays those people, what the job is like. Because, if you think about who responds to the kinds of emergencies that people call for, whether it's law enforcement or fire or emergency medical services, those are huge crises that people are undergoing. And the 911 telecommunicator stays on the line with them until help gets there.
Yes.
And those, however long that takes, if you're in a rural area, it might be a while. They tell people how to do CPR. They tell people how to deliver babies.
Yeah.
They stay on the phone with them while they're hiding in the closet. They listen to family members, who are in terrible situations with their family. It's and you can't do that on a day-to-day basis without being affected by it. You really can't.
So let's talk about the classification at the federal government level. These courageous women and men under the headset, they are considered the same as?
Well, at this point, they are considered clerical, but I will tell you that I was able to not work with, but understand a little bit more about the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the occupational classification system that they manage. It's a database. There are over 800 occupational classifications in it. And I think one of the things that the 911 community needs to understand is that it's not that they can't change the classification or that they won't. It's that they aren't able to because they run a database. And so unless we are able to provide the objective, measurable data that they need. I'll give you one example. The last time they did a survey, they collected over 1,000 job descriptions from 911 centers. Most of the job descriptions described the job as clerical, and many of the job descriptions were older than the person under the headset. Well, that's not on the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so one of the things that the 911 program has done is put together a reclassification toolkit,
right,
to give them all the tools they need to document, to update their job descriptions, to document the training, to document the kinds of technology that is used, so that the next time around, when the survey is done, the data are there.
Yeah, we've done it in Maryland. We have reclassified our folks, and it was just part of a big omnibus bill. And so
and that will help, because I know that there are several organizations that have the map of the United States on their website with all the states, designated who have reclassified their telecommunicators.
Well,
and all of that will help.
Good. I hope they have updated it. So what can Congress do to make a difference on 911?
Well, from my perspective, I think what they can do is sort of the same thing that I did, is listen to the people who are doing the job. I mean, one of the groups that I worked most closely with at the national level was the National Association of State 911 Administrators. And to understand, what was going on in the states, what their challenges were, what kinds of resources, tools, and education and support they needed, and worked with them to make those things happen.
And when you say support, how much of support do you mean is money?
Well, I think if you're talking about making technical upgrades, that is highly dependent on the governance structure and funding.
Yes.
I mean, those are always the two things that hold it up. So certainly that would help. I mean, the responders received $7 billion to upgrade their network. We have yet to make the same kind of investment in 911.
Right. We were close, right? And then it didn't happen.
Well, yeah.
Hmm. So what is your proudest accomplishment from before you retired at NHTSA and doing 911 nationally? What's your proudest accomplishment, and what's your biggest disappointment of what you didn't get done that your successor is working on?
Oh boy. I guess what I'm proud of is going back to what I talked about before. We started with 3 lines out of a statute. That's it.
Wow.
And if you just spend 5 minutes on 911.gov, you can see what it has evolved into over the 15 to 20 years that has existed. So, but nobody does that alone.
Sure.
It was really, I took my cue, as I said, from the community.
Yeah.
What do you think needs to happen? What do you need? And worked with them to make those things happen. And I think, that's what made it such a success.
So, and frustration, disappointment, what didn't go the way you'd hoped?
Oh, I don't know. I was a federal employee for a long time. Maybe we'll just
Enough
leave it
said.
at that.
Enough said. All right. So other 3-digit numbers. So
Mhm.
one of the things that as you know that I'm passionate about is the whole interconnectivity, interoperability. So someone calls 911, but they're having a mental health crisis. They need to be transferred to 988 for
Mhm.
crisis or suicide
Mhm.
prevention. And then in Maryland, we have 211. We're working on a statewide 311. 6 counties have it right now, but hoping in the next few years to have it statewide. Talk about just how do we educate people? What do you think? What do you think needs to be done to make sure that folks know about where to call for help?
Certainly, public education has a huge part in that. I mean, the 911 system has been around for over 50 years,
Mhm.
and it took a really, really long time to get people to remember that number. And so 311 and 988 will probably go through a similar evolution in terms of people being able to remember it. And as children are being born and growing up, I mean, it's a constant process.
Yes.
There are constantly, and there are people coming into this country from Europe where it's 112. So it's a
Mhm.
constant. You can't really think that you have gotten there in terms of people knowing that number. You
Yes.
really can't.
But I'll tell you, from the youngest ages, kids
Mhm.
know if there's a problem, they know what 3 digits to dial, which is awesome. So let's talk about 911 Wonder Women,
Yeah.
which I just think is amazing. And you gave me such a great honor to recognize me and gave me this pin.
You are a 911 Wonder Woman.
Thank you. So talk about how that's established. You're currently the chair of the board. You were hoping for 100 members, and there are so many amazing women out there. And folks should totally go to 91wonderwomen.com. There's a lot of good information and a blog. You can nominate women each month. Not every month, but a lot of months, women are recognized and showcased. There's a blog. There's even yoga classes. So
Mhm.
why don't you talk about what your goals were, what you hope to accomplish with this, and why you think it's important?
Well, it was started by a woman named Sarah Weston, who I've known for 10 or 15 years. And the whole idea behind this nonprofit organization is to empower women within 911 to understand, how much potential they have. Going back to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, over 70% of telecommunicators are female, but
Yep.
they are underrepresented, as they are in a lot of industries, in leadership positions. So the group exists to empower women to move themselves into more of those positions by doing 3 things. by mentoring,
Mhm.
by providing education and training, and a really supportive network for folks to fall back on. And that has taken on many forms. As you said, when Sarah started this, she hoped maybe 100 people would join.
Right.
13,000 is our current number.
Wow.
I think she hit on
I
something
think
there.
I think indeed. Well, I
Yeah.
can tell you, so I've been to 20 of the 24 counties 911 centers, and one of the most important reasons that I go is to say thank you
Yep.
to our 911 specialists, because they are invisible. No one knows who they are. No one, I think they are underpaid, underbenefited, underappreciated, and they're shocked when a senator wants to meet them and thank them and know about their
Yeah.
lives.
Yeah.
And it's such a small thing, but it's really being seen, because otherwise the only time they're seen is if there's an error.
Right. I mean, the fact is that the system works so well,
Oh, well.
over 240 million times a year, that the only time you hear about it, the only time it makes news is when something goes wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Um, so tell me a story of a 911 Wonder Woman, not on this Zoom, that who inspires you, a story that you find moving or
Well, I think one of the things that I really enjoy the most about the group is sort of it's organic. I mean, it started with a Facebook group, and that has been maintained. And to this day, just the other day, a new telecommunicator posted, "I screwed up. Maybe I'm not any good at this." I'm not kidding. Within 24 hours, she got 20 or 30 responses of advice, support, and that's the kind of group it is.
that gives me
There are many stories like that. I mean, what I've noticed is, the number of people who have had the courage to speak up and do more presentations at, meetings and conferences has really increased. And so it's but it's that I hope it never loses that organic nature, because it really makes it special.
That's fantastic. Well, anyone who's watching, if you think you've got the fortitude, the courage, the compassion, and the dispassionate nature to possibly work under the headset, we need you. So consider contacting your local 911 center, look online, or make a phone call, reach out, because I suspect that they're looking for you. So it's worth checking out. Laurie Flaherty, it is time for our fast five quick questions to let folks know more about you. So with all of your time in the emergency room and working with 911 and stuff, what is something you do to relax that helps you to chill out and regain some sense of equilibrium?
I since I was a kid, I have been singing. I've always found a way to do that. And everything else in my life is so analytical. It's really fun to use the other side of my brain.
You do it publicly or privately?
Yes.
Like in the shower, but you perform?
No, well,
You're in a choir?
I'm in a choir. I don't sing solo anymore. Those days are over. And in fact, during COVID, uh, the choir that I sing with, of course, disbanded. And I realized what I miss the most about it is the sound that you make when you sing together.
Yes.
There's just nothing like it. And it's fun to be able to go back. So yeah, that's what I do.
And what genre of music is your choir?
Well, it's a mixed bag, which is really fun.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, question 2.
Mhm.
Do you have something on your bucket list now that you're retired, something that you're willing to share with us? Something you've always fantasized about doing that now you've got a little bit of time?
Well, I've really enjoyed doing whatever the hell I want.
That's a good answer. Like that.
Yeah, I have a really good friend who was a kindergarten teacher for 35 years. And quick story. So one of her students said to her, when they ask you what you are going to do when you retire, and she put her hand on her hip and she said, "You just tell them I'm going to do whatever I want."
Exactly.
Yeah, you got to do it with attitude.
Like, question 3,
Yeah.
what's a family tradition, maybe around a holiday or something that you cherish and that you've continued?
Uh, we still get together every, holiday season. Odd habit that we have. We found a bunch of old photos after my mom died, the old brown and white photos. And we found a photo of this couple, Mimi and Alphonse. We have no idea who these people are, but we kept finding pictures of them with their name on the back. So every time we get together, if we're having dinner or something, we raise our glasses to Mimi and Alphonse. No idea who these people
Wow, that's so cool.
are.
I bet there's a great story. I hope you're able to find it sometime. Um, question 4, what's your favorite inspirational quote? What's something that lifts you up?
Hmm. It's not necessarily a quote, but one of the things that I've worked really hard to remember is that it's not about me.
Mm,
Especially having worked in this town for as long as I have,
yes.
the relationships I've enjoyed the most are the ones where we're focusing on a common task, and people forget their own agendas, because once it's about you, it's kind of all over.
That's
But
a great mantra. That is great advice
yeah.
we should all be remembering. The last question, Laurie Flaherty, Supreme 9-1 Wonder Woman. What is your hidden secret superpower? What's a skill or talent you have, something you're really good at that most folks can't do?
Hmm. I'm not sure it's a skill, but I think uh, I have almost always been able to maintain a sense of humor. Even if only I'm laughing at how absurd something is. Sometimes, if you choose to laugh, it can keep you going. Uh, and if there's a way to have fun, why show up if you can't just have a little bit of fun? So, that's it.
Amen. That's a good one. I like it. Well,
Yeah.
Laurie Flaherty, thank you for your extraordinary career making a difference, saving lives directly and then indirectly throughout the country. So, and you were such a wonderful, kind teacher and inspiration to me and to so many others. So thank you for
Well,
taking time to
I
chat.
I have to say that I heard you speak just recently, and I've heard a lot of like public policy people talk about 911, and clearly their staff wrote their comments, and they don't know. They usually tell us things that we already know.
Mm,
I was so impressed with how much you have learned, and how much you know about 911, and how much you've done to help the 911 system in Maryland in particular. I just want you to know, like, I remember like where you were when you started, and it's been really impressive to watch. So thank you, right back at you.
thank you. Thank you. It's been truly just the highest honor to work with so many smart, passionate people and to learn. And then when you're a senator, you can get it done. So
Yeah,
all the time. So that's pretty satisfying. So Laurie, I look forward to seeing you again soon. All the best. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.